Jenny Carter had rehearsed her presentation a dozen times. She had stayed late in the office almost every night for the past 2 weeks, making sure every number lined up, every chart was clear and every projection sounded convincing. This was her chance to show the board that the new upgrade of her software would not only maintain Anderson Technologies' lead in the market but expand it into areas no competitor had touched. She had earned this moment. At least she thought she had. The boardroom was polished to perfection. Long windows overlooked the city and the table gleamed under the lights. Senior executives sat with papers and tablets, nodding as Jenny clicked through her slides. She spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. For a while she felt respected. They listened, they scribbled notes, and a few even murmured in approval. When she revealed the final projections, numbers that showed revenue could double in 2 years, several board members leaned forward with genuine interest. Jenny allowed herself to feel a spark of pride. But that spark was extinguished almost instantly when Kevin Anderson cleared his throat. He was seated at the head of the table, the seat that used to belong to his father. Freshly appointed as CEO's successor, Kevin looked every inch the heir of a corporate empire. Expensive suit, confident posture, and a careless smirk that made Jenny uneasy. He had only joined the company officially a month ago, but already he carried himself as if every success had been his personal achievement. "That's impressive," Kevin said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Very polished presentation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, his eyes sweeping over Jenny with a deliberate slowness. "She's just a pretty face. Don't let the charm fool you." The words hung in the air like a slap. For a moment the room was silent. Then a few board members chuckled awkwardly, and others hid their smirks behind their hands. Jenny froze, her throat tightening. She felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to keep her expression neutral. She wanted to argue, to defend her years of late nights, her patents, her long list of solved problems and successful launches. But the weight of Kevin's presence and the mocking eyes of the room pressed against her like a wall. If she spoke now, they would see desperation, not strength. So she did what she had always done in the face of arrogance. She endured it quietly. "Numbers are numbers, Kevin," one older director finally said, trying to shift the mood. "And Jenny's projections are solid." Kevin shrugged, still smirking. "Sure, numbers can look solid on paper. But real leadership isn't about fancy slides. It's about vision. And frankly, I'm not convinced she's got it." The laughter this time was less restrained. Jenny clenched her fists under the table, nails biting into her palms. Every instinct screamed at her to walk out, to slam the door behind her, to never look back. But she knew better than to let them see her break. With deliberate calm, she clicked to the final slide, thanked the board for their attention, and ended her presentation. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. She barely heard the discussions that followed, the talk about quarterly results, the plans for expansion, the reassurances that Anderson Technologies would remain strong under Kevin's leadership. Her mind was a storm, replaying Kevin's words again and again. "Just a pretty face." When the meeting ended, Jenny gathered her papers slowly, her hands steady though her heart pounded. A few executives gave her polite smiles, the kind people reserve for someone they think has already lost. Kevin didn't even glance at her as he walked out, surrounded by sycophants eager to flatter him. Jenny left the boardroom in silence, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She didn't stop until she reached her office, closing the door behind her. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, something stronger stirred: resolve. She looked at the folders on her desk, each one containing records of her patents, her innovations, the backbone of Anderson Technologies' success. She had fought for them, registered them in her own name, and built the company's fortune on their foundation. Kevin could mock her all he wanted, but without her work his empire would collapse. Jenny sat down, the city skyline visible through her window. Her humiliation was still raw, but as she stared at the horizon she made a quiet promise to herself. She would not allow Kevin's arrogance to define her worth. If he wanted to see her as just a pretty face, then she would make sure the world saw her for what she truly was: the mind that held the company's future in her hands. And if she chose to let go, Anderson Technologies would fall with it. Jenny Carter didn't smile as she turned off her computer for the night, but her eyes held a new fire. Kevin Anderson had just made the worst mistake of his career. The office was unusually quiet that evening. Most of the staff had already gone home, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant glow of the city through the tall windows. Jenny sat at her desk, staring at the folders in front of her. Her name was neatly printed on each patent, a small detail most people overlooked, but a detail that now meant everything. She reached out and traced the letters with her finger, as if reminding herself of the battles she had fought to secure them. Her humiliation at the boardroom still echoed in her ears. She had played it calm, pretending not to care, but inside she had felt every snicker like a blade. If she stayed, the whispers would never stop. Kevin would keep undermining her, and the board would keep treating her like decoration rather than the architect of their success. No matter how hard she worked, her dignity had already been bruised, and she refused to let anyone strip away what little remained. Jenny stood and began packing. She moved slowly at first, slipping books into a box, removing her coffee mug from the shelf, and folding her framed certificates with care. Each item carried a memory: nights spent debugging code, early mornings perfecting presentations, lunches eaten at her desk while chasing deadlines. The weight of those years settled heavily on her shoulders, but she reminded herself that she was not leaving with nothing. She was leaving with her worth intact, and with the rights to the very patents Kevin had mocked without understanding. The sound of footsteps broke her focus. A colleague, Sarah, peeked into the office, her eyes widening at the sight of the half-empty desk. "Jenny, are you leaving?" Jenny forced a small smile. "It's time." Sarah stepped in, worry in her voice. "Don't let Kevin chase you out. Everyone knows you're the brains behind half of this company. Give it a little time, maybe the board will see through him." Jenny shook her head gently. "They laughed with him, Sarah. They saw me humiliated and did nothing. Staying here means letting them decide my worth, and I won't give them that power." Other colleagues stopped by as the evening went on. Some tried to persuade her to reconsider. Others whispered their support, but Jenny remained firm. She thanked them for their kindness, but her decision was already carved in stone. This wasn't just about a job. It was about her self-respect, and no career was worth the constant erosion of her dignity. By the time the clock struck 9, the halls were deserted again. Jenny stood in the center of her office, now stripped bare, her box of belongings sitting by the door. She took one last look at the empty desk and then at the folders still spread neatly across the surface. Picking them up, she stacked them carefully as though they were fragile treasures. Each patent represented her late nights, her brilliance, and her persistence when no one believed in her. They weren't just documents, they were proof that she mattered. She paused by the window before leaving, staring at the skyline. The city pulsed with energy, 1,000 opportunities hidden among the lights. She felt fear, yes, but alongside it was something stronger. Hope. She whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. This is where I begin again." The security guard at the lobby gave her a puzzled look as she walked out with the box in her arms, but Jenny only smiled faintly. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Days passed before Kevin noticed her absence. He was too busy entertaining investors, too caught up in his own self-importance to realize that the woman he had dismissed had quietly walked away. Meetings were held without her, minor glitches in the system went unresolved, but Kevin waved them off. He assumed she was simply taking some time off, or that her departure made no real difference. It wasn't until a week later, when an urgent call came from the legal department, that Kevin finally understood the magnitude of what had happened. He had mocked Jenny as nothing more than a pretty face, but the patents that propped up Anderson Technologies' empire bore her name, and her name alone. Without her cooperation, without her presence, the empire he thought he controlled was already beginning to crumble. Jenny, meanwhile, sat in a small cafe across town with her laptop open, sketching plans for her own future. The bitterness of humiliation still lingered, but it was slowly giving way to determination. She would build something new, something that belonged entirely to her. And when the world compared her company to Anderson Technologies, they would see clearly who had been the true visionary all along. She didn't know yet how Kevin would react when he realized the truth, but in her heart, Jenny no longer cared. She had walked away quietly, yes, but her silence carried more power than any argument could. For Jenny Carter, this was not goodbye, it was the first step toward becoming unstoppable. For a brief moment, Kevin Anderson basked in glory. The board applauded his arrival as though he were a savior, praising his charm and confidence. His father's retirement had been framed as a new era for Anderson Technologies, and Kevin believed every word of it. The media splashed his photo across magazines, hailing him as the young visionary set to take the company into the future. He smiled in every photograph, shook hands at every luncheon, and delivered speeches filled with confidence, even though he had barely skimmed the technical reports his staff prepared for him. In the boardroom, directors toasted to strong leadership, convincing themselves that Kevin's arrogance was the same as vision. For the first few weeks, everything seemed smooth. Contracts already in motion before Kevin took over continued to deliver revenue, and quarterly numbers looked respectable. Kevin celebrated as if these achievements had been his personal victories. But then the cracks began to show. The first sign came from an investor who quietly pulled out of a renewal deal. Kevin brushed it off, calling them short-sighted. A week later, another major investor announced they were shifting funds elsewhere. By the third withdrawal, murmurs spread through the boardroom. At first, they suspected market volatility or competitive pressure, but deeper reviews revealed the truth. Without Jenny Carter's involvement, the company's patents were suddenly questionable. Kevin was called into an emergency meeting with the legal department. He walked in with his usual swagger, but within minutes, his face hardened. A senior lawyer slid a stack of documents across the table and said, "Every critical patent Anderson Technologies uses, the software, the upgrades, the foundational systems, they're not owned by the company. They're owned by Jenny Carter personally." Kevin blinked, then scoffed. "That's impossible. He was an employee. Everything she worked on should belong to us." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Not in this case. She filed each patent under her name. The company merely licensed them. With her departure, we have no legal authority to claim ownership without renegotiation." Silence fell except for the sound of Kevin's fist slamming the table. His voice rose, sharp and furious. "Why the hell didn't anyone tell me this before? Who let her walk out with the very foundation of our company?" The legal team shifted uncomfortably, but one finally replied, "We assumed you were aware. The records have been clear for years. Mr. Anderson, you never asked." Kevin's jaw tightened. His pride, which had carried him so easily through applause and compliments, now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. He remembered Jenny in the boardroom, her calm voice, the flawless data she had presented, and his own smirk as he dismissed her. Just a pretty face. The words mocked him now, echoing louder than the lawyer's explanations. Meanwhile, Jenny sat at a small corner cafe, sipping coffee with her best friend, Clara. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Clara leaned forward eagerly, her eyes shining with curiosity. "So, you really walked away? Just like that?" Jenny smiled softly, stirring her coffee. "Just like that. I couldn't stay in a place that didn't value me. I'd rather start from scratch than let them treat me as decoration." Clara shook her head in awe. "You're braver than I could ever be. But Jenny, what will you do now?" Jenny looked down at her notebook, where sketches of ideas and plans filled the pages. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held determination. "I'll build my own company. Something small at first. I don't need the empire they have, I just need the freedom to create on my terms." They sat together in the warm hum of the cafe, the weight of humiliation slowly lifting from Jenny's shoulders. Here she was not mocked or dismissed. Here she was simply herself, a woman with vision and talent ready to begin again. The thought gave her peace, even as she knew the road ahead would be difficult. Back at Anderson Technologies, chaos brewed. Investors demanded explanations, clients hesitated to renew contracts, and whispers spread that the new CEO might not be capable of protecting the company's future. Kevin tried to cover the cracks with confident speeches, but the board members were no longer so quick to nod along. Behind closed doors, they began to question his judgment. One evening, Kevin sat alone in his father's old office, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. He loosened his tie, running a hand through his hair. He had inherited an empire, but without Jenny's work, it felt like sand slipping through his fingers. His pride told him she was replaceable, yet every report, every failed negotiation, every number on the page proved otherwise. For the first time, doubt crept into Kevin's chest. He would never admit it aloud, but in the silence of the office he whispered to himself, "Maybe I underestimated her." Jenny, across the city, closed her notebook with a small smile. She had only just begun laying the stones of her new path, but already she felt lighter. Anderson Technologies was no longer her burden. It was Kevin's, and he was just beginning to feel the weight of what he had lost. Jenny Carter's apartment was small, tucked above a row of shops on a quiet street, but to her it felt like the beginning of something vast. The dining table became her desk, covered with notebooks, sketches, and her aging laptop that hummed through long nights. Empty coffee mugs gathered by the corner, a testament to her stubborn energy. For the first time in years, she wasn't bound by polished boardrooms or condescending glances. She was free to create without permission, free to design without judgment. Her company had no name at first. She scribbled ideas in her notebook, rejecting one after another until she finally wrote Carter Innovations. The simplicity of it appealed to her. It was hers, unpolished, honest, and bearing her name without apology. She registered it the next morning, smiling faintly as she signed the papers. It wasn't an empire, not yet, but it was a beginning she owned entirely. The days blurred into each other as she worked. Morning sunlight spilled across her table as she typed lines of code, refining prototypes and drafting proposals. By nightfall, her eyes ached, but she pressed on, often collapsing onto the couch only to wake with new ideas. Clara stopped by often, bringing groceries or just company, teasing her about turning the apartment into the world's tiniest headquarters. Jenny laughed, but deep down she cherished the support. Every word of encouragement built her resolve stronger. Meanwhile, across the city, Kevin Anderson was drowning in noise. His phone rang endlessly with angry investors demanding answers, while board members whispered about his lack of foresight. He slammed doors in meetings, barked orders at staff, and blamed the legal team for failing to secure Jenny's patents. In truth, Kevin knew the oversight was his, but pride locked his tongue. Admitting he had underestimated Jenny would mean admitting weakness, and Kevin Anderson had built his image on arrogance. At night, he paced his father's office, staring at spreadsheets that bled red. Competitors were circling like vultures, rumors of instability spreading in the market. He read news articles that described Carter Innovations as a promising new startup by the former lead developer of Anderson Technologies. Each headline felt like a jab at his pride. "She won't last," he muttered to himself. "She doesn't have the resources, the team, or the experience. This is temporary." But deep down, doubt gnawed at him, a quiet voice he couldn't silence. Jenny, unaware of his turmoil, pressed forward. She sent emails to contacts she had met over the years, carefully drafting each message with humility and confidence. Some ignored her, others wished her luck politely, but a few responded with genuine interest. A small design firm asked her to develop a custom system. Another contact suggested introducing her to a potential investor. Each opportunity, no matter how modest, felt like fuel. She was building brick by brick, not rushing but steady. One evening, Jenny sat by the window, her laptop balanced on her knees, the city glowing beneath her. She realized that despite the exhaustion, she hadn't felt this alive in years. At Anderson Technologies, her work had been swallowed by the company's name, her identity buried beneath someone else's logo. Now, every line of code she wrote carried her name. Every idea belonged solely to her. The thought filled her chest with quiet joy. Across town, Kevin faced another storm. A deal with a longtime partner collapsed after they expressed concern about intellectual property stability. Kevin slammed the phone down so hard his assistant flinched. In the silence that followed, he felt a pang of realization. The stability they questioned wasn't about the company, it was about him. He had mocked Jenny as insignificant, but now her absence echoed in every failed deal. For the first time, Kevin thought about Jenny not as an employee he had dismissed but as a rival. The image of her calm face in the boardroom haunted him. She hadn't shouted back, hadn't argued. She had simply looked at him, swallowed her pride, and walked away. Now he wondered if that quiet strength was the reason she was succeeding where he was faltering. The weeks moved quickly. Carter Innovations landed its first contract, modest in scope but monumental in meaning. Jenny stayed up until dawn finalizing the project, her hands trembling slightly when she clicked send. When the client responded with praise and prompt payment, she closed her laptop and leaned back, tears pricking her eyes. It wasn't just money, it was proof that she could stand on her own. Jenny poured herself a cup of tea, whispering into the quiet of her apartment, "This is only the beginning." On the other side of the city, Kevin stood at a high-rise window, gripping a glass of whiskey as he looked out over the same skyline. Investors were pulling further away, the board's patience thinning. He clenched his jaw, vowing silently that he wouldn't let Jenny's shadow overshadow him. "If she wants a war," he muttered, "she'll get one." Neither knew it yet, but their paths, one rising with quiet determination, the other stumbling under arrogance, were destined to collide again more fiercely than before. The annual Tech Horizons Expo was the kind of event where reputations were built, or destroyed, in a single afternoon. Journalists from every major outlet crowded the exhibition hall, cameras flashing, microphones poised, eager to cover the industry's next big breakthrough. Startups, corporate giants, and ambitious dreamers all competed for attention. It was here that Anderson Technologies had always dominated the spotlight, and Kevin Anderson intended to make sure that tradition continued, no matter the turbulence behind his boardroom doors. Kevin arrived with a carefully rehearsed smile, surrounded by assistants carrying glossy brochures and PR representatives who whispered schedules into his ear. He wore confidence like armor, greeting investors and journalists as if nothing had been amiss within his crumbling empire. "We're stronger than ever," he declared to one reporter, his tone smooth, his handshake firm. But beneath the veneer his mind ticked nervously. He had read the list of featured presenters, and among the names was one he hadn't expected to see so soon: Carter Innovations. Jenny Carter. Kevin told himself it was nothing. A fledgling startup wouldn't outshine him. Yet as he walked the crowded aisles, he caught sight of the booth at the far end where Carter Innovations was displayed. Clean, modern, with subtle but striking branding, it drew attention without screaming for it. And standing there, speaking with calm assurance to a group of investors, was Jenny. Kevin stopped for half a second, masking his surprise before striding forward. She looked different. Gone was the weary employee who had once stood nervously in Anderson's boardroom. In her place stood a woman polished and confident, her posture straight, her voice clear. She wore a simple but elegant suit, her hair neatly tied back and her expression composed. When she noticed Kevin approaching, she smiled, calm, polite, distant. "Kevin," she said, her voice smooth as though they were casual acquaintances. "I didn't expect to see you here so early." Kevin smirked, hiding the twist of discomfort in his stomach. "I could say the same, Jenny. I see you've been keeping busy." "Busy is good," she replied lightly, gesturing to the display behind her. "We're just introducing ourselves. Small steps." But Kevin knew better. The small crowd gathered around her booth, the eager way journalists scribbled notes. It wasn't small. Jenny was making waves and everyone could see it. He tried to downplay it, leaning casually on the edge of her table. "A startup is one thing, Jenny. But keeping up in this industry? That's another game entirely." Jenny's polite smile never wavered. "Fortunately, I like difficult games." The words stung more than Kevin cared to admit. He excused himself quickly, moving back to his own display, but his thoughts stayed tangled around the image of her calm face. For the rest of the afternoon he plastered his smile wider, shook more hands and gave more speeches. Yet every time the crowd shifted, he noticed how often their attention drifted to Carter Innovations. The climax of the expo came during the Rising Stars of Technology segment, a showcase meant to highlight companies poised for major breakthroughs. Kevin sat near the stage, ready for Anderson Technologies to reclaim the spotlight. But when the host announced Carter Innovations as one of the featured companies, Kevin felt the ground shift beneath him. Jenny walked onto the stage with unhurried grace, her presentation crisp and confident. She spoke not of grand empires or vague visions, but of practical solutions, user-friendly designs and forward-thinking systems that could transform entire industries. The audience leaned in, captivated not by flashy words but by the quiet authority she carried. Applause erupted as she concluded, and the host praised Carter Innovations as a company to watch in the coming years. Kevin clapped slowly, forcing his expression into neutrality, but inside his pride burned. That spotlight had once been his. 4 years Anderson Technologies had owned this stage, and now Jenny, whom he had once dismissed as nothing more than a pretty face, was being hailed as the future. Later, as the expo wound down, Kevin found himself watching Jenny from a distance. She was surrounded by investors, shaking hands, smiling in that same calm, unshakable way. She carried herself with control that he realized he had never possessed, even at his best. For the first time he felt something he had never expected to feel toward her. Not just rivalry, not just resentment, but respect. Jenny, meanwhile, packed her things with quiet satisfaction. She hadn't sought revenge, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of proving herself in the very arena where Kevin had once humiliated her. She had walked onto that stage carrying only her ideas, her patents, and her resolve, and the world had listened. As she left the expo, the city lights glittering beyond the glass doors, she allowed herself a small smile. Carter Innovations had been born in the shadow of arrogance, but today it had stepped into its own light. Kevin watched her go, his fists tightening at his sides. He told himself it wasn't over. Not yet. The war between them had only just begun. Kevin Anderson had never been one to accept defeat. The expo had been a humiliation he refused to replay. 4 days afterward, headlines praised Carter Innovations, investors buzzed about Jenny's vision, and journalists began speculating whether Anderson Technologies was losing its edge. Kevin couldn't bear it. The board's disapproving stares haunted him, and the whisper that he had underestimated Jenny was growing louder with each passing day. So, Kevin did what he always did when cornered: he attacked. Within a week, Anderson Technologies launched a series of aggressive campaigns aimed at reclaiming dominance. He undercut prices on major contracts, slashed licensing fees, and poured marketing money into advertising that painted Anderson as the only reliable industry giant. More insidiously, Kevin whispered warnings into investors' ears. Carter Innovations was untested, Jenny was inexperienced in leadership, and her projects were risky experiments. He wielded his power ruthlessly, determined to block her growth at every step. But Jenny Carter wasn't easily intimidated. Each time Kevin tried to close a door, she found another way in. Where he relied on brute force and old money, Jenny relied on innovation. She released features Anderson had never considered. Sleeker designs, user-focused interfaces, flexible licensing models that appealed to smaller firms. Instead of competing dollar for dollar, she positioned Carter Innovations as fresh, adaptable, and future-oriented. Investors, once skeptical, began to lean toward her vision. Jenny maintained her calm exterior in every meeting, but behind closed doors the battles weighed heavily. She worked late into the night, poring over contracts, ensuring no loophole could be exploited. Clara often found her at the dining table turned desk, eyes red but expression steady. "You should rest," Clara urged one evening, placing a cup of tea in front of her. Jenny shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "If I rest now, Kevin wins." Yet despite her composure, Jenny couldn't deny the lingering hurt. She remembered the sting of Kevin's words in the boardroom, the laughter that had followed, and the way her dignity had been crushed in front of everyone. Each victory now felt like stitching over an old wound. She hid the pain carefully, folding it beneath layers of professionalism. No one would see her break again. On the other side of the city, Kevin's strategy was unraveling. His price cuts won temporary deals but drained profits. His smear tactics slowed Jenny's momentum but failed to stop it. And in quiet hours, when the chaos of the day settled, Kevin found himself doing something he never imagined: watching Jenny's interviews online. Late at night, in the dim glow of his office, he clicked through videos of her speaking at panels or answering questions from journalists. She was composed, articulate, and, he grudgingly admitted, brilliant. There was no trace of the timid employee he had mocked. Instead, she carried herself with quiet authority, answering even the toughest questions with clarity that disarmed critics. Kevin leaned back in his chair after one such interview, whiskey glass in hand, his thoughts restless. "How the hell did I not see this?" he muttered. His arrogance had blinded him, and now the world saw Jenny for who she truly was. He hated the admiration clawing at his chest, the reluctant respect that made him linger on her words long after the video ended. During the day, however, pride kept his mask intact. At board meetings he barked about doubling their efforts, about crushing Carter Innovations before it became a true threat. "She's nothing without our name," he insisted. But the flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed him, and the board members noticed. Jenny noticed too. Though she never confronted Kevin directly, she read between the lines of his moves. Each attempt to block her confirmed one thing. He saw her as a rival now, not a discarded employee. And strangely, that acknowledgement fueled her determination even more. She no longer fought simply for dignity. She fought to prove that her vision could stand against the empire that once silenced her. One afternoon, after signing a contract with a mid-sized firm that Anderson had failed to secure, Jenny sat back in her chair and allowed herself a quiet smile. It wasn't just a win. It was proof that investors no longer trembled at Kevin's name. They trusted her, Jenny Carter, to deliver results. Across town, Kevin stared at the same news, his fists tightening. He told himself this was war, and in war only one side survived. Yet deep down, the admiration wouldn't leave him. Each time he tried to destroy her, she responded with brilliance he couldn't ignore. For the first time in his life, Kevin realized he wasn't only fighting a competitor. He was fighting the memory of his own arrogance, and the woman who had turned his insult into her greatest weapon. Anderson Technologies had once been untouchable, its name enough to silence competitors and charm investors. But under Kevin's leadership, the cracks widened with each passing week. Deals fell through, clients complained about overpromises, and rivals moved in with sharper products. The aggressive campaigns he had launched to block Jenny's rise now backfired, draining resources without securing loyalty. Then came the lawsuits, small at first from disgruntled partners claiming breach of contract. Kevin dismissed them as nuisances, but when the third, then the fourth arrived, the board's patience fractured. In meetings, the directors no longer applauded his speeches. They pressed him with hard questions, asked about the sustainability of his strategies, and compared the company's stagnation with Carter Innovations' quiet but steady growth. Kevin snapped back with arrogance, insisting he had everything under control. But when he returned to his office alone, the mask slipped. The papers on his desk were not reports of victory, but warnings of decline. One night, after another tense call with investors, Kevin poured himself whiskey after whiskey until the city lights blurred outside his window. He thought of the boardroom months ago, of Jenny standing at the front, calm and precise, and of his own voice cutting her down. "Just a pretty face." The words echoed like a curse, one he had written himself. By midnight, Kevin's steps were unsteady as he left his office. He didn't remember hailing a cab or how he ended up outside the modest building that housed Carter Innovations. The lights inside were still on. Of course they were. Jenny never seemed to stop working. Kevin stood on the sidewalk, the night air biting his skin, staring up at the glow of her office window. He told himself to leave, to preserve what little pride he had left, but his feet carried him forward. The receptionist had already gone home, so he pushed open the unlocked door and climbed the narrow stairs. The corridor smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. At the end, through a glass door, he saw her, Jenny, sitting at her desk typing intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. For a moment Kevin hesitated. She looked so composed, so focused, nothing like the image of her that haunted him in his whiskey-fueled guilt. Then she noticed him. Her eyes widened slightly, but her posture remained steady. "Kevin," she asked, her voice measured, "what are you doing here?" He stepped inside, swaying slightly, the smell of alcohol trailing him. His usual smirk was gone. Instead, his expression was weary, his eyes shadowed. He opened his mouth, but the words tangled before he forced them out. "Maybe I was wrong." Jenny froze. Of all the things he could have said, that was the last she expected. Her heart clenched unexpectedly, a flash of memory hitting her. The sting of his insult, the humiliation of the boardroom, the long nights of rebuilding herself from nothing. She wanted to believe there was sincerity in his tone, but she also knew better than to be softened by weakness. "You were," she said at last, her voice cool as ice. Kevin winced, her reply cutting sharper than any lawsuit or boardroom scolding. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Jenny held his gaze, her eyes unwavering, even as a part of her twisted with conflicting emotions. She had dreamed of this moment once, an apology and admission. But now, standing in her own office, she realized his words didn't heal anything. They only confirmed what she already knew. Kevin lowered himself into a chair across from her, running a hand through his hair. "Everything's falling apart," he muttered almost to himself. "The deals, the board, the lawsuits. I can't." His voice trailed off. Jenny looked at him, this man who had once seemed untouchable, now unraveling in front of her. There was no satisfaction in it, only a hollow ache. She folded her arms, steadying herself. "You chose arrogance over reason, Kevin. You thought belittling me would make you stronger. It didn't. And now you're paying the price." His eyes lifted to hers, raw with something she hadn't seen before, vulnerability. "And you've built everything I thought you couldn't." Jenny's chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. "Because I knew my worth when you didn't." Kevin sat in silence, her words heavy between them. The air hummed with unspoken thoughts, his grudging respect, her buried hurt, the chasm carved by pride and betrayal. Finally, Jenny stood, gathering her folders into a neat stack. "Go home, Kevin. Sober up. Whatever you're looking for here, you won't find it from me." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly Kevin rose, his shoulders slumped. He gave a small nod as if acknowledging defeat and walked out into the night. Jenny watched him go, her heart aching in ways she didn't want to admit. She pressed a hand against the desk to steady herself, inhaling deeply. Kevin Anderson had finally cracked, but she refused to be the one to piece him back together. The announcement came on a bright Monday morning. Carter Innovations had signed a strategic partnership with Horizon Systems, a multinational firm known for its deep pockets and global reach. The deal was more than just lucrative. It was a declaration that Jenny's company had stepped out of the shadows. Industry news outlets exploded with headlines, "Carter Innovations partners with Horizon. A new era in tech?" Investors flooded her inbox, eager to discuss opportunities. Overnight, Jenny's startup leapt from promising to unstoppable. In her small office, Jenny sat surrounded by her team, still small, still scrappy, but filled with excitement. Clara hugged her tightly, laughing. "Do you realize what this means? You're no longer the underdog. You're the one everyone's watching now." Jenny smiled, but her heart was steadier than the cheers around her. She wasn't intoxicated by victory. She was grounded by the memory of where she had begun. She thought of the boardroom, Kevin's smirk, and the sting of being called just a pretty face. This triumph was built on the ashes of that humiliation, and though she stood tall now, she couldn't forget how it had felt to be dismissed. Across town, Kevin sat in his father's old office, staring at the glowing headlines on his screen. The Horizon partnership hit him like a blow to the gut. For years, Anderson Technologies had pursued Horizon with little success. Now Jenny, with her small team and limited resources, had done what his empire could not. The board was already in uproar, demanding explanations, questioning his leadership. Kevin tuned out their accusations, his focus fixed on Jenny's photo beside the article. She stood on a stage with Horizon's CEO, shaking hands, her expression calm and confident. Instead of the usual anger that flared whenever she succeeded, something different stirred in Kevin. Admiration, sharp and unwelcome, gnawed at him. He remembered dismissing her, mocking her in front of everyone. Yet here she was, not just surviving but reshaping the industry. And in the hollow silence of his office, Kevin felt a loneliness that surprised him. For all his wealth, his staff, and his influence, he realized he had no one who stood beside him out of loyalty or respect. Only fear and obligation. Jenny had built hers with trust, and it showed. That night, Kevin poured himself another glass of whiskey, though it brought little comfort. He scrolled through Jenny's interviews again, this time lingering on the way her eyes lit up when she talked about innovation. There was fire there, something real, something he couldn't manufacture with PR teams or staged speeches. For the first time, Kevin admitted to himself that he missed working with her, even if he had never truly valued her then. Jenny, meanwhile, lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. The partnership with Horizon should have felt like a pure victory, but a knot lingered in her chest. She thought of Kevin stumbling into her office drunk, admitting he might have been wrong. His vulnerability had startled her more than his cruelty ever had. Beneath the arrogance, beneath the mistakes, she had glimpsed a man cracking under the weight of his own pride. She shook her head, forcing the thought away. Kevin had mocked her, undermined her, nearly destroyed her career. She owed him nothing. And yet, memory was cruel. It kept returning to the boyish smirk he had worn that first day in the boardroom, the careless words that had changed everything, and the broken man who had stood in her office weeks later. Triumph felt sweet, but it wasn't clean. The industry buzz only grew louder in the weeks that followed. Carter Innovations rolled out its first joint project with Horizon, winning praise for its sleek design and practical impact. Investors began pulling away from Anderson Technologies, redirecting their attention to Jenny's rising star. The balance had tipped and everyone knew it. At Anderson, Kevin faced the storm alone. Directors threatened to call for his removal, and some whispered about selling off divisions to keep the company afloat. Kevin fought back with every ounce of stubbornness he had, but even he could see the tide was against him. Yet oddly, instead of despising Jenny, he found himself almost proud of her. It was a twisted feeling, admiration tangled with regret, respect laced with longing. He had once called her just a pretty face, and now she was the face of everything he had failed to achieve. One evening, as Jenny walked out of her office, she paused on the sidewalk, the city buzzing around her. She pulled her coat tighter, staring at the lights glowing above. She had won a battle that once felt impossible, yet her thoughts betrayed her. Victory had brought her freedom, but it also reminded her of the war that wasn't finished, the one inside her, between her pride and the part of her heart she tried to ignore. Kevin looked out over the same skyline from his high-rise window, the glass cool beneath his palm. He whispered into the emptiness, "You were never just a pretty face." The words would never reach her ears, but they clung to him, heavy with truth. The battle was Jenny's and she had won it. But the war between them, of pride, of power, of unspoken emotions, was far from over. The boardroom at Anderson Technologies no longer felt like a place of power. Felt like a tribunal. The long mahogany table that once gleamed with pride now seemed to reflect only Kevin's failures. Directors leaned forward with sharp eyes and sharp tongues, their patience frayed by months of decline. "Where are the results you promised?" one demanded. "You said you had a strategy. All we see are falling numbers," another snapped. "Investors are fleeing. The market doesn't trust us anymore. Do you even understand the severity of this?" Kevin sat at the head of the table, his usual smirk gone. He tried to maintain his composure, but his hands clenched tightly against the armrests. He had dodged questions for weeks, masking his panic with bravado, but the walls had closed in. The Horizon Systems deal had been the final blow. The partnership should have been Anderson's triumph, yet Jenny Carter had secured it instead. And the press hadn't been kind. Headlines screamed, "Carter Innovations outsmarts industry giant," and "Anderson Technologies fumbles under new leadership." Now the board wanted blood. One director leaned back, his voice cold. "If you cannot provide answers, Mr. Anderson, perhaps it's time we consider replacing you." Kevin's chest tightened. For a moment he thought of lying, of conjuring yet another promise of recovery. But the weight of his failures crushed his pride. He looked at the faces around him, their distrust carved deep, and realized the truth could no longer be hidden. His voice, when it came, was low and hoarse. "It wasn't me," he said. The room fell silent. Kevin lifted his eyes, meeting their stares. "The success you've been celebrating all these years, it wasn't mine. It was hers. Jenny Carter. She was the one behind the patents, the innovation, the systems that kept this company alive. I dismissed her. I mocked her. And she walked away with everything we needed to survive." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom, disbelief giving way to shock. Some exchanged glances, others leaned in as if they hadn't heard correctly. Kevin let the silence stretch, then pressed on, his tone steadier now, though it cost him everything. "She built this company's future and I was too blind to see it. Now she's built her own empire, and we're collapsing because I thought arrogance was enough to lead. It wasn't." The admission was picked up by reporters within hours. Someone from the board leaked his confession, and by evening the story had spread across every major outlet. News anchors replayed his words, "It wasn't me. It was hers." Social media erupted, painting Jenny as the betrayed genius who had been cast aside, only to rise and outshine her former employer. Hashtags with her name trended worldwide. Jenny discovered the news while working late in her apartment. Clara had sent her a message with a link, "You'll want to see this." She clicked it and there was Kevin's face on the screen, pale and strained, his voice admitting to the world what he had never admitted to her in private. Her chest tightened as she listened. Vindication surged first. Finally, the truth was spoken, and the world saw her for who she was, not the caricature Kevin had reduced her to. Yet alongside that triumph was something quieter, heavier. Sorrow. She remembered the night he had stumbled into her office, muttering that maybe he had been wrong. She had brushed him off, refusing to let his weakness soften her resolve. Now, watching him stripped bare in front of the entire world, she felt that same ache in her chest. Clara burst into the room waving her phone. "Jenny, do you realize what this means? You've won. Everyone knows now. They're calling you the woman who built the empire and then built her own." Jenny smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Kevin's image lingered there, his mask shattered, his pride gone. She should have felt only satisfaction, but the sorrow wouldn't leave her. Not for him as a man, but for the waste of what could have been if he had chosen differently. The next day, reporters crowded outside Carter Innovations, eager for a statement. Jenny kept her composure, answering with calm professionalism. "I'm grateful the truth is recognized," she said evenly. "But my focus is not on the past. It's on building the future." Her words made headlines of their own, cementing her as not just a survivor but a leader with vision. Across the city, Kevin watched her on television from his empty office. The board had suspended him pending review and most of his staff avoided his gaze. He poured himself another drink but didn't take a sip. Instead, he whispered to the screen, to the woman who had once been at his side, "You deserved better. And I was too blind to see it." Jenny turned off her own television later that night, the weight of his words still echoing in her mind. She leaned against her desk, gazing out at the skyline. She had the vindication she had longed for, but it came hand in hand with quiet sorrow. Some wounds never healed, even when victory was hers. The reckoning had come, not just for Kevin but for both of them. The new Carter Innovations headquarters was not the tallest building in the city, nor the flashiest, but to Jenny it was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. Glass walls gleamed in the afternoon sun, reflecting the skyline back like a promise. Inside, the offices buzzed with quiet energy. Her employees moved with purpose, their faces alight with pride in the company they were building together. Every detail, the sleek logo on the wall, the hum of servers, the polished conference rooms, reminded Jenny of how far she had come from the tiny dining table in her apartment. She stood by the wide window in her new office, gazing out over the city. For the first time she allowed herself to breathe. She had fought humiliation, ridicule, and betrayal. She had built something no one could take away. The boardrooms that once laughed at her now watched her with respect, and the industry that once underestimated her now sought her approval. It wasn't revenge that filled her heart, but the certainty that she had carved her own path free from anyone's permission. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie. Jenny turned, expecting Clara or one of her staff. Instead, Kevin Anderson stood at the doorway. He was different, his tailored suit still sharp but his presence stripped of arrogance. There was no smirk, no false bravado. His shoulders seemed heavier, his eyes darker, yet in them was a sincerity she had never seen before. For a long moment neither spoke. The hum of the city filled the silence between them. Then Kevin stepped forward, stopping a respectful distance away. His voice was low, steady, without the rehearsed smoothness he once wore like armor. "You were never just a pretty face," he said quietly. "You were everything." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavy with the weight of all their history. Jenny's heart clenched, memories flashing. His cruel dismissal, her quiet departure, the nights she rebuilt herself piece by piece, and his broken confession in her office weeks ago. For years she had longed to hear him acknowledge her worth, but now, standing here, she realized she no longer needed it. Jenny smiled faintly, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the calm of someone who had found peace within herself. "I know," she replied. Her tone was gentle but unyielding, carrying the truth she had earned through sweat and fire. Kevin's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, didn't ask for forgiveness. For once he understood it wasn't his place. He simply nodded, his eyes reflecting both regret and admiration. "I just wanted you to know," he murmured. Jenny studied him, this man who had once mocked her and now stood stripped of all the power he had inherited. There was no satisfaction in seeing him like this, only the quiet recognition that their war had changed them both. He had lost what she had gained, but even now she could see the boy he might have been had arrogance not consumed him. Whether she forgave him or not remained unspoken. It didn't matter anymore. Forgiveness wasn't the measure of her victory. Her worth no longer hinged on his recognition nor on revenge. It lived in the glass tower she stood in the people who trusted her, in the company that bore her name. Kevin turned toward the door, pausing only once to look back. His lips pressed into a thin smile, one more of acceptance than joy. Then he left, his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving Jenny alone once more. She turned back to the window, the skyline stretching wide before her. The city glowed with possibility, and for the first time she felt entirely free. Whatever tomorrow held, challenges, triumphs, or heartaches, she knew she would face it not as the woman who had been mocked, but as the woman who had risen. Her reflection glimmered faintly on the glass. Not just a pretty face, but a leader, a visionary, a survivor. Jenny Carter had won, not by crushing others but by choosing herself. The future was hers on her own terms.